Welcome to Plus Elegance. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the stunning dress styles as you listen to this captivating story of kindness, destiny, and transformation. It was a golden morning in the city of Cambridge, where autumn leaves fell like petals of gold along the quiet streets. The grand mansion of billionaire Edward Harrington overlooked the river, glistening with power and prestige. Inside, everything spoke of wealth: crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and marble floors polished to perfection. But among all that luxury, one thing was missing: warmth. Edward's life revolved around numbers, meetings, and boardrooms. He was known as the man who could turn any failing business into gold. Yet at home, his heart carried a quiet ache. His wife had passed away years ago, leaving behind their only daughter, little Emma. At 8 years old, Emma was bright but shy. She struggled in her studies and rarely smiled anymore. Tutors came and went, but none could reach her. One cold afternoon, Edward's driver stopped near a small park on the outskirts of town. There, sitting on a bench beneath the bare branches, was a young woman with a sketchbook in her hand and a worn shawl over her shoulders. Her clothes were neat but clearly old, her shoes scuffed, her eyes tired yet kind. She was watching a few children play, and when one of them stumbled over a math problem on a scrap of paper, she gently knelt beside them, explaining with patience and grace. The driver noticed her first and mentioned her to Edward later that evening. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "there's a young woman who helps the neighborhood children with lessons, though she looks like she hasn't eaten properly in days." For reasons he couldn't explain, Edward was intrigued. A week later, he found himself driving past the park. There she was again, the same shawl, the same soft voice, the same patience. When Emma's new tutor quit that morning, Edward made an impulsive decision that would change everything. He stepped out of his car, approached her gently, and said, "Excuse me, miss. My name is Edward Harrington. I need a tutor for my daughter. Would you consider it?" The young woman hesitated. "Sir, I don't have references or fancy clothes. I just love teaching." "Then that's enough," Edward replied. Her name was Clara Bennett. Once a top student of literature at the university, her dreams had been derailed after her parents died suddenly. With no relatives to help her, she lost her home and drifted between shelters. Yet she never lost her dignity, or her compassion. When Clara arrived at the Harrington estate for the first time, the staff looked at her with curious eyes. Her coat was worn, her bag faded. But Emma, hiding behind the grand staircase, peeked out shyly, and for the first time in months, smiled. The lessons began that very day. Clara didn't teach from textbooks alone. She told stories, drew pictures, and encouraged Emma to learn through creativity. Soon, laughter filled the study room, something Edward hadn't heard in so long. Days turned into weeks. Emma's grades improved, her confidence bloomed, and even the house felt brighter. Edward watched from afar, quietly amazed. One evening, after returning from a long business trip, he found Clara and Emma in the garden under the soft glow of fairy lights. Clara was reading aloud, her voice gentle as the night breeze. Emma sat by her side, her head resting on her arm. For the first time in years, Edward's heart softened. He realized it wasn't just Emma learning to live again, it was him, too. But not everyone approved. A few high society acquaintances whispered behind his back. "A billionaire hiring a homeless woman? What scandalous charity," they said. Even his business advisor warned, "It could harm your reputation." Edward brushed it off. "If reputation means ignoring goodness," he said firmly, "then I want none of it." One day, a storm hit the city. Floods swept through the lower streets, including the shelter where Clara sometimes stayed. Without hesitation, Edward sent his men to help. When she found out, tears welled in her eyes. "No one has ever cared like that before," she whispered. The next morning, Edward invited her for breakfast. The dining hall, usually formal and distant, felt strangely intimate. He asked softly, "Clara, why did you never tell me about your situation?" She smiled faintly. "Because I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be useful again." Edward looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes held the quiet strength of someone who had lost everything yet still chose kindness. "You've given my daughter back her joy," he said. "And you've reminded me what truly matters." Months passed, and Clara's presence became a blessing to the entire household. She started a small literacy club for children from poor neighborhoods, and Edward funded it without hesitation. The mansion's library turned into a warm space filled with laughter, books, and life. But the biggest surprise came during Emma's school recital. She stood on stage, confident and radiant, and said, "This is for my teacher, Miss Clara, who taught me not just to read, but to believe in myself." The crowd applauded. Edward's eyes glistened with pride. After the event, reporters surrounded them, curious about the young woman beside the billionaire. When they asked Clara how she felt being lifted from homelessness to such a position, she replied humbly, "I was never lifted. I was simply given a chance to stand." That quote made headlines across the country. Donations poured in for her literacy foundation. She was invited to speak at schools and conferences about resilience and hope. And through it all, Edward remained quietly by her side, not as her savior, but as her supporter and friend. A year later, during a charity gala, Edward surprised everyone when he took Clara's hand and said, "This woman taught my daughter, but she also taught me compassion. Today, I want to build not just a future with her, but for her." Gasps filled the room. Clara's eyes widened, and before she could speak, he continued softly, "Will you marry me?" Tears flowed freely down her face as she nodded. Emma ran to hug them both, her laughter echoing across the hall. Their wedding was simple yet elegant, held in the very garden where Clara used to read to Emma. She wore a modest ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves, her hair adorned with fresh flowers. The guests whispered again, but this time with admiration. Years later, Clara's foundation expanded to several cities, helping thousands of underprivileged children. And in every interview, she always said the same thing: kindness can change the course of destiny. "I'm living proof." As for Edward, he often said that the best investment he ever made wasn't in stocks or business, but in believing in a young woman who had nothing, yet gave everything. So whenever you see someone struggling, remember this story. Sometimes, the person you least expect to teach you something profound might be the one who changes your world forever. And as you watch these elegant dress styles glide across your screen, remember that true beauty isn't just in what we wear. It's in the grace, humility, and kindness that we choose to carry in our hearts.